The existence of England, one of the most recognizable nations in modern history, is often taken for granted. Its story, frequently overshadowed by the formation of Great Britain and the United Kingdom, is one of turmoil, survival, and eventual unification. To understand how England came to be, we must delve into the depths of its ancient past, through centuries of migration, conflict, and consolidation. While England officially emerged as a unified kingdom by 927 AD, its creation was a long and arduous journey. It is a tale of tribes and invaders, of kings and warriors, of ambition and war, all contributing to the formation of the kingdom we now know as England. The beginning of England's story is tied to the fall of the Roman Empire. By the early 5th century, Roman power in Britain was crumbling. For nearly 400 years, the Romans had ruled the British Isles, bringing with them roads, infrastructure, governance, and military protection. However, as the Roman Empire was weakened by internal strife and external threats from Germanic tribes, it began withdrawing its legions from the farthest reaches of the empire. Britain, on the western edge of the Roman world, was one of the first to be abandoned. By 410 AD, Roman troops had fully withdrawn, leaving the native Britons to fend for themselves. With the Romans gone, the Britons faced new challenges. The northern tribes of the Picts and the Scots, long held at bay by Roman fortifications like Hadrian's Wall, began raiding the southern territories. To defend themselves, the Britons turned to mercenaries, specifically the Anglo-Saxon tribes from present-day northern Germany and southern Denmark. These tribes, including the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, were initially invited as allies to help repel the Pictish and Scottish raiders. Gildas, a 6th century British monk, provides one of the earliest accounts of this Anglo-Saxon migration, describing how the Britons invited the barbarian peoples like wolves into their midst. However, the Anglo-Saxons soon turned on their hosts. Having realized the fertility and wealth of the land, they began to establish their own settlements, pushing the native Britons westward into what would become Wales, Cornwall, and Brittany. By the late 5th century, the Anglo-Saxon migration had transformed much of the British mainland. Over the next few centuries, these settlers divided the land into small, often warring kingdoms. The 7 most prominent were Essex, Kent, Sussex, Mercia, East Anglia, Northumbria, and Wessex, collectively known as the heptarchy. The early Anglo-Saxon period, from the late 5th to the early 8th century, was one of fragmentation and regional power struggles. The heptarchy was not a formal alliance of kingdoms, but a term later used by historians to describe the various Anglo-Saxon realms. These kingdoms were often at odds with one another, vying for dominance. Northumbria in the north, Mercia in the Midlands, and Wessex in the south became the most powerful players in this struggle for supremacy. One of the most significant developments during this period was the gradual conversion of the Anglo-Saxons to Christianity. The Roman Catholic Church, keen to re-establish its influence in Britain after the fall of the Roman Empire, sent missionaries to convert the pagan Anglo-Saxons. In 597 AD, Pope Gregory I dispatched Augustine of Canterbury to Kent, where he successfully converted Ethelbert, the King of Kent. This marked the beginning of the Christianization of England, a process that would unfold over several centuries. By the early 8th century, Christianity had spread to all of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, leading to the establishment of monasteries and the spread of learning and literacy. Despite this shared religious identity, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms remained politically fragmented. The struggle for dominance was fierce, with kingdoms frequently clashing in battle. Mercia, under kings like Penda and Offa, rose to prominence in the 7th and 8th centuries, controlling much of southern and central England. Offa, in particular, is remembered for constructing Offa's Dyke, a massive earthwork that marked the boundary between Mercia and the Welsh kingdoms. Northumbria, meanwhile, reached its zenith under kings like Edwin and Oswald, who extended their influence across northern England and southern Scotland. While the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were busy fighting among themselves, a new and more dangerous threat emerged from across the North Sea: the Vikings. These Norse seafarers, hailing from Scandinavia, had begun raiding the coasts of Britain and Ireland by the late 8th century. Their raids were initially small in scale but terrifyingly effective. The first major Viking raid in England occurred in 793 AD when a fleet attacked the Lindisfarne monastery in Northumbria. This raid shocked the Anglo-Saxons, as Lindisfarne was a major center of Christian learning and devotion. The Viking assault on such a sacred site signaled that no place in England was safe from these invaders. Over the next few decades, Viking raids became increasingly frequent and destructive. By the middle of the 9th century, Viking ambitions had shifted from mere raiding to outright conquest. In 865 AD, a massive Viking army known as the Great Heathen Army landed in East Anglia. This army, led by brothers Halfdan Ragnarsson and Ivar the Boneless, aimed to conquer and settle in England, rather than merely plunder it. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were ill-prepared to face such a formidable and organized force. By 870, the Great Heathen Army had captured East Anglia, and in 874 they defeated Mercia, forcing its king into exile. Northumbria had already fallen, leaving only Wessex standing as the last bastion of Anglo-Saxon resistance. Wessex, ruled by King Ethelred, soon came under Viking attack as well, but Ethelred's younger brother Alfred would emerge as one of England's greatest heroes. In 871 AD, Alfred became king of Wessex following the death of his brother Ethelred. The situation was dire. The Vikings had already overrun much of England, and Wessex was their next target. Alfred's early reign was marked by a series of defeats. The Vikings, led by Guthrum, a powerful Danish warlord, had taken much of the kingdom, forcing Alfred to retreat into the marshes of Somerset. However, Alfred was not content to merely hide and wait. He regrouped his forces and launched a daring guerrilla campaign against the Vikings, harassing their supply lines and striking their camps. In 878 AD, Alfred emerged from hiding and gathered his forces for a final confrontation with Guthrum at the Battle of Edington. In a hard-fought battle, Alfred's army decisively defeated the Viking forces, forcing Guthrum to sue for peace. The Treaty of Wedmore followed, in which Guthrum agreed to convert to Christianity and withdrew to East Anglia, leaving Wessex in peace. However, the Vikings retained control over much of England, particularly the northern and eastern regions, which became known as the Danelaw, a region where Danish law and customs prevailed. Alfred's victory at Edington secured Wessex's independence, but he knew that the Viking threat was far from over. Over the next few decades, Alfred transformed Wessex into a military powerhouse. He reorganized the kingdom's defenses, building a network of fortified towns known as burhs, and creating a standing army. He also established a navy to counter the Viking longships. These reforms would prove crucial in the defense of Wessex and the eventual reconquest of England. When Alfred died in 899 AD, his legacy of defense and resilience was passed on to his son, Edward the Elder, and daughter, Aethelflaed, Lady of Mercia. Together, they embarked on a series of campaigns aimed at reclaiming the lands lost to the Vikings in the Danelaw. Edward focused on expanding Wessex's control into eastern England, while Aethelflaed led the defense and expansion of Mercia. By 917 AD, the Anglo-Saxon forces had made significant progress. Aethelflaed captured Derby and Leicester, two major Viking strongholds, and extended her influence into York. Edward, meanwhile, conquered East Anglia and incorporated it into his kingdom. The combined efforts of Edward and Aethelflaed effectively rolled back Viking control, and by the time of Aethelflaed's death in 918 AD, the Anglo-Saxons had regained most of the territory that had been lost to the Vikings. Following Aethelflaed's death, Edward moved quickly to consolidate power. Mercia, which had been semi-independent under Aethelflaed's rule, was brought under Edward's direct control, uniting Wessex and Mercia under a single ruler for the first time. By 924 AD, Edward had secured the allegiance of the remaining Viking-held territories, paving the way for his son Aethelstan to complete the unification of England. Aethelstan, who succeeded his father Edward in 924 AD, is widely regarded as the first true king of a unified England. His reign marked the culmination of decades of warfare, diplomacy, and consolidation. Aethelstan's most significant achievement was the conquest of Northumbria, the last Viking-controlled kingdom in England. Following the death of the Viking king Sihtric, Aethelstan marched north and brought Northumbria under his control, completing the unification of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. With Northumbria now part of his realm, Aethelstan became the first king to rule over all of England. However, his ambitions did not stop there. Aethelstan sought to expand his influence beyond England's borders and assert dominance over the other kingdoms of the British Isles. In 937 AD, he led an army into Scotland, hoping to bring the Kingdom of Alba under English control. This invasion prompted a coalition of forces, led by Constantine II, King of Alba, and Olaf Guthfrithson, King of Dublin, to oppose Aethelstan. The two sides met at the Battle of Brunanburh, one of the most significant and bloodiest battles in early medieval British history. Though the exact location of the battle remains a mystery, its outcome was clear. Aethelstan's forces emerged victorious, decisively defeating the combined armies of Alba, Dublin, and Strathclyde. The victory at Brunanburh solidified Aethelstan's control over England and secured his place as one of its greatest kings. Despite Aethelstan's triumphs, the Viking threat was not fully extinguished. Following his death in 939 AD, England once again faced turmoil. Olaf Guthfrithson, the Viking king of Dublin, seized the opportunity to invade England, capturing York and reclaiming parts of Northumbria. Aethelstan's half-brother, Edmund I, who succeeded him, spent much of his reign reconquering these territories. By 944 AD, Edmund had successfully driven the Vikings out of Northumbria, reuniting England. His reign was cut short when he was mysteriously murdered in 946 AD, leaving his younger brother Edred to inherit the throne. Edred faced immediate challenges as Eric Bloodaxe, a Norwegian Viking, seized control of Northumbria. After nearly a decade of conflict, Edred finally reclaimed Northumbria for England, bringing an end to Viking rule in the region. Following Edred's death, his nephew Edgar the Peaceful ascended to the throne in 959 AD. Edgar's reign marked a period of stability and consolidation, a stark contrast to the decades of warfare that had preceded it. Under Edgar, the Kingdom of England was finally able to enjoy a prolonged period of peace. Edgar's reign is notable for his efforts to integrate the various cultures and legal systems within England. He upheld many of the laws and customs from the Danelaw, ensuring that the Danish population within England was treated fairly, and helping to maintain harmony between the Anglo-Saxon and Danish communities. This policy of inclusion and fairness helped to solidify the unity of the kingdom, laying the foundations for a more cohesive and centralized English state. Edgar's nearly two-decade reign also saw the establishment of a strong monarchical authority. He maintained close ties with the Church, which played a key role in legitimizing his rule and promoting unity throughout the kingdom. His coronation in 973 AD at Bath is often seen as the symbolic moment when the English monarchy truly came into its own, with Edgar being recognized as the overlord of all the other kings of the British Isles, including those of Scotland and Wales. The creation of England was a long and tumultuous process, shaped by centuries of migration, invasion, warfare, and diplomacy. From the early Anglo-Saxon kingdoms to the Viking invasions, and finally, the unification efforts of Alfred the Great, Edward the Elder, and Aethelstan, the path to a united England was far from straightforward. The eventual consolidation of power under rulers like Edgar the Peaceful allowed England to emerge as a stable and unified kingdom. The establishment of laws, fortified towns, and a strong central authority helped to maintain this unity, even in the face of continued threats from Viking raiders and internal strife. By the end of the 10th century, England had become one of the most powerful kingdoms in Europe, with a strong monarchy, a unified church, and a resilient people. The story of England's formation is one of endurance and adaptability, as the Anglo-Saxons, Danes, and other peoples who settled on its shores gradually came together to form a single nation. This kingdom, forged through centuries of conflict and cooperation, would go on to play a central role in the history of the British Isles and, eventually, the world. But its origins, rooted in the struggles of the Anglo-Saxons and the Viking Age, remain a crucial chapter in the broader narrative of medieval Europe, a testament to the resilience of a people determined to forge a lasting kingdom out of the chaos of the early Middle Ages. The formation of England was a story etched in blood, conquest, and resilience. By the time the Anglo-Saxons had established the Kingdom of England, their grip on the land had been cemented after countless clashes and reconquests. But as history has shown time and again, just because you have built something doesn't mean you can hold on to it forever. Across the English Channel, an old Viking settlement turned Norman duchy lay in wait, biding its time to seize what it felt was rightfully theirs. The Normans, descendants of Vikings who had long settled in northern France, would ultimately decide England's fate. The tale of the Norman Conquest begins with two events that took place years apart: the granting of Normandy to a Viking chieftain named Rollo, and the death of the Anglo-Saxon king, Edward the Confessor. These events, though seemingly unrelated, set into motion one of the most important moments in English history. Normandy, named after the Norsemen who had settled there, began as a Viking colony in northern France. In 911, Charles the Simple, the Carolingian ruler of West Francia, struck a deal with Rollo, leader of the Viking forces ravaging his lands. Charles offered Rollo the territory that would become Normandy, with the understanding that the Norsemen would defend the coast against other Viking raiders. Rollo agreed, and over time the Norse invaders adopted the language, customs, and religion of the Frankish people. Their Viking roots, however, did not vanish entirely. and these formidable warriors maintained a culture of militarism and expansion. By the mid-11th century, Normandy was a powerful duchy under the rule of William the Bastard, later known as William the Conqueror. William was the illegitimate son of Robert I, Duke of Normandy, and had to fight to secure his title. He proved his military prowess in campaigns against neighboring regions, establishing himself as one of the most formidable rulers in Northern Europe. On the other side of the Channel, England had spent centuries battling Viking incursions of its own. The Anglo-Saxon kings, descendants of those who had repelled the Vikings and formed a united English kingdom, were themselves of mixed bloodlines, with ties to the Viking world through marriage and diplomacy. In the 10th century, Aethelred the Unready, an Anglo-Saxon king, sought to strengthen his position by marrying Emma of Normandy, daughter of the Duke of Normandy. This marriage was meant to secure an alliance between England and Normandy, solidifying the English king's connection to their Norman neighbors. But Aethelred's reign was fraught with conflict, and the Viking invasions of the early 11th century, led by King Sweyn Forkbeard of Denmark and later his son Knut, resulted in a temporary loss of the English throne. After years of struggle, Aethelred's son, Edward the Confessor, was restored to the throne in 1042. Edward had spent years in exile in Normandy, forming deep ties with the Norman court. Edward ruled England for over 2 decades but died in January 1066 without an heir, sparking a succession crisis that would ultimately lead to the Norman invasion. Edward's death in 1066 set off a chain of events that would change the course of English history forever. The Anglo-Saxon Witenagemot, a council of nobles, elected Harold Godwinson, a powerful English earl, as the next king. Harold was a capable leader and had long been one of Edward's most trusted advisors. However, his claim to the throne was not universally accepted. 3 other men believed they had a rightful claim to the English crown: William, Duke of Normandy, Harold Hardrada, King of Norway, and Edgar the Etheling, the last surviving male member of the Anglo-Saxon royal line. Each would soon make their move to seize the throne. William's claim was rooted in his relationship with Edward the Confessor. As Edward had spent much of his life in Normandy, he and William had developed a close relationship. William claimed that Edward had promised him the English crown, and to add weight to his claim, he pointed to his marriage to Matilda of Flanders, whose noble lineage connected her to the English royal family through Aethelred's marriage to Emma of Normandy. Harold Hardrada, on the other hand, based his claim on a treaty between the former Danish and Norwegian kings. According to this agreement, if either king died without an heir, the other would inherit his lands. Harold, seeing England as part of this agreement, launched his invasion from the north. In September 1066, Harold Hardrada sailed across the North Sea with a force of approximately 10,000 men. He landed in the north of England, joined by Tostig Godwinson, Harold's exiled brother who had been conspiring against him. Harold's army quickly captured York, the largest city in northern England, and began preparing for further advances. Harold Godwinson, now king, was forced to act quickly. He raised an army and marched north, covering the nearly 200 miles between London and York in a matter of days. On September 25th, Harold's forces confronted Harold's army at Stamford Bridge. The battle was fierce and brutal. The Norwegians, caught off guard, were forced to fight without their full armor, having left it behind at their ships. Despite this disadvantage, they fought valiantly, and the English army struggled to break through their ranks. At one point, a lone Norwegian warrior famously held off the entire English army at a narrow bridge, allowing his comrades to regroup. Eventually, however, the English overwhelmed the Norwegians, and both Harold Hardrada and Tostig were killed in battle. The Norwegian invasion had been crushed, but at a great cost to Harold's army. Barely had Harold tasted victory when news arrived that William of Normandy had landed on the southern coast of England. On September 28, 1066, after weeks of delay due to bad weather, William's invasion fleet arrived at Pevensey Bay. William had assembled a massive force, estimated to be around 7,000 men, including infantry, cavalry, and archers, supported by a fleet of 600 ships. William's army began pillaging the surrounding countryside, drawing Harold south to confront him. Harold, determined to stop William before he could gain a foothold, made the fateful decision to march his army, already exhausted from the battle at Stamford Bridge, directly to meet the Normans. On October 14, 1066, the two armies met near Hastings at Senlac Hill. Harold's forces, numbering around 7,000 men, took up a defensive position on the hill, forming a shield wall. William's army, made up of a combination of Norman knights, Breton infantry, and Flemish mercenaries, faced an uphill battle. The Battle of Hastings would prove to be one of the most pivotal moments in English history. William's strategy was to break the English shield wall with waves of archers, infantry, and cavalry. However, the battle did not go according to plan. At the outset, William's archers fired volleys of arrows at the English, but due to the steep incline and the protection offered by the shield wall, the arrows had little effect. Next, William sent his infantry to assault the English lines, but they too were repelled by the steadfast Anglo-Saxon defense. Finally, William unleashed his cavalry, but they struggled to ascend the hill and were met with fierce resistance from the English, wielding axes and swords. At one point, the Norman left flank began to falter, and rumors spread that William had been killed. Sensing victory, a portion of the English forces broke ranks and charged down the hill in pursuit of the retreating Normans. This proved to be a fatal mistake. William, who was very much alive, removed his helmet to show his troops that he was still in command and rallied his forces for a counterattack. As the English soldiers who had broken ranks chased the fleeing Normans, William's cavalry turned and surrounded them, cutting them down. This tactic, known as the feigned retreat, was used several times throughout the battle, each time drawing more English soldiers away from the shield wall and into the open, where they were vulnerable to cavalry attacks. The battle raged for hours, with neither side gaining a clear advantage. But as the day wore on, the English forces, still weary from their march and the battle at Stamford Bridge, began to tire. Late in the afternoon, an arrow struck Harold Godwinson in the eye, killing him instantly. His death demoralized the English army, and without their leader, the shield wall finally broke. William's forces seized the opportunity, launching a final devastating assault that routed the remaining English forces. With Harold dead and his army defeated, William began his march towards London. Although he encountered resistance from local lords and the remnants of the Anglo-Saxon nobility, most submitted to him after the decisive victory at Hastings. On Christmas Day, 1066, William was crowned King of England at Westminster Abbey, becoming known as William the Conqueror. However, William's conquest of England was far from complete. Over the next several years, he faced numerous rebellions, particularly in the north of England, where resistance to Norman rule was strongest. William responded with brutal campaigns of suppression, most notably the Harrying of the North, in which entire regions were devastated to quell resistance. Villages were burned, crops destroyed, and thousands of people were killed or left to starve. Despite these challenges, William managed to consolidate his power over England. He introduced a new aristocracy, replacing the Anglo-Saxon nobility with Norman lords loyal to him. The Norman Conquest also brought about profound changes in English society, law, and culture. The feudal system was introduced, and the English language itself began to evolve as Norman French merged with Anglo-Saxon to form the basis of modern English. The Norman Conquest of 1066 was a turning point in English history. It marked the end of Anglo-Saxon rule and the beginning of a new era under the Normans. William the Conqueror's victory at Hastings ensured that England would be ruled by a Norman elite for generations to come, reshaping the country's political, social, and cultural landscape. The impact of the conquest was felt not only in England, but throughout Europe. The Normans, already a powerful force in northern France, now controlled one of the most important kingdoms in Europe. This bolstered their influence in continental affairs, leading to further Norman expansion, including in southern Italy and the Holy Land during the Crusades. In England, the Norman conquest set the stage for centuries of conflict and integration between the Anglo-Saxon and Norman populations. Over time, the two groups would merge, creating a new English identity that blended elements of both cultures. But in 1066, none of this was certain. What was certain, however, was that William, Duke of Normandy, had accomplished what no one had done since the days of the Roman Empire. He had conquered England, and his legacy would endure for centuries. This victory at Hastings, despite its challenges and close calls, solidified William's place in history as William the Conqueror. The Norman Conquest was not just the end of Anglo-Saxon England. It was the beginning of a new chapter in the history of Britain, one that would echo through the ages, shaping the future of a nation that would one day rule over vast territories across the globe.